Welcome everyone to the Rona Report. This is a contemporary show where people of color, young people of color, come and talk about contemporary problems. If this is your first time joining us today, my name is Elizabeth Chijioke. I am your host. I am so glad to have you.
Hello, new intro. I'm Chi.
I'm Rock.
And I'm Marisa.
And I've been practicing. All right, we're just going to really get into it today. Marisa has come with the heat, so we're really excited about not really excited, it's actually very very telling of American history. I'll just say that. And so we're really excited to bring you this content and this topic, which is the similarities between the AIDS epidemic and what we see going on with COVID. For those of us living in the United States, for the last 6 to 7 to 8 months, we've been dealing with this pandemic, and it's been growing, and it's definitely altered our way of life here, and people have died, are dying, and will die. And so that's all I'm going to say about it. I'm going to let Marisa introduce the topic to us. So thank you for joining us. So actually 2 weeks ago, we incorporated a highlight reel, or like a news reel segment into our show, where each of us kind of talk about just really quickly something that's happening. So I'll just let Rock or Chi, whoever wants to jump in, go in first and talk about, anything that's gotten your attention in the last few days or weeks, or,
I was laughing. I was on a job site today listening to, I don't know if you all heard William Barr's comments recently, the Attorney General, about how a national lockdown, even though we did not have one, was synonymous with slavery. Well, his exact words were, a national lockdown was the most egregious civil rights violation since slavery. And it's funny because
like what?
Mary, and when I say we, I mean this country, and as a citizen of this country, yes, we interred Japanese people in World War II.
Right.
We tested on Black people in the 60s and 50s, and Jim Crow South was a thing until like recently.
Right.
So at this point, I think he's trolling us. I think him and Trump are I think it's because William Barr is not dumb. Like, he's a very educated, this is his second time as Attorney General. He's a very educated person. So he knows he's engaging in very dangerous comparisons. So I think he's actually just and it's weird for an Attorney General to be speaking. He sounds like a Fox News pundit. I wouldn't even say a Fox News pundit. He sounds like one of those internet, if you guys remember The Blaze, he sounds like he's off of The Blaze, where Tommy Lauren used to come off of. Yeah. So that was interesting to me. I kept saying, when I was on the job, I kept saying slavery?
Right.
Like really?
Right.
Really?
That's such an insult and like a slap in the face. Like, obviously that's what I'm trying to do, but
Wait, so you have to stay home to keep your family and other community members safe, but that's on the same plane as slavery? Like, fam, people were raped and murdered and
separated
and
their land, their children,
and forced to work when they were sick. So yeah, that was a little crazy to me.
Yeah. I think we are definitely being trolled. Thanks for sharing, Chief.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that shit's wild. But I feel like also kind of we've been doing this thing too, where I feel like we're kind of tying in things that we've seen in history or things like historical perspectives to our conversations because it makes it more relevant. And so there is that whole when you're at a certain level of understanding, it's like you can't excuse the fact that you don't know the consequence of what you're saying or what you're doing because that it's already been understood what the consequence of that behavior is. So kind of similar to that, one of the things that I've been seeing written about and being brought up is one, the fact that there was a nurse and it was a Georgia detention center for ICE where they very blatantly said like there are like obvious concerns when it comes to COVID and the spread of COVID in these centers and the fact that they are not able to they're not able to maintain safety and safety precautions beyond the fact that there's the larger conversation around non-consensual hysterectomies that are happening within the ICE centers too. And so it's just the kind of the same conversation around this, the eugenics and the distrust of government and government bodies, government entities, and the whole conversation too around if a vaccine came out, would people take it? And it's like, what if this government over this past year has shown us any reason to trust in it? And so there's
Yep.
a lot of history repeating itself.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how that played because not only do Black Americans, rightfully so, not trust the government, now there's white people who are just like, nah, we're not doing it. Like, so who's gonna take this vaccine? I don't know. Like, maybe they force feed it to old people or something. I don't know, but
at this point, I would believe you if you said the government did that because I'm kind of like, yes, that'd be right up its alley of all the other atrocities they've been and are doing.
Yeah. And then the AstraZeneca stuff really kind of just worried me. Like y'all rushing this, and it's causing. Yeah, I'm not taking that. I'm not taking. I hope nobody. I hope nobody in my family takes it. I'm not taking. I need to see after maybe a year or 2 years. I need to see what's up with that because I'm not taking that. I'm sorry.
Well, didn't one of the head of the CDC said it wouldn't even be out until next year in the summer at the latest, or at the earliest. Excuse me, at the earliest. And Trump was like, no, it's gonna be out. It's gonna be out in October.
Today he agreed on. Today he said April. So he stopped saying October, November. Today he said April. So yeah.
Well, we'll see about that. I guess we'll cross it when we get there. Kind of like that we've been doing. But while the two of you guys are talking, I was actually I do have something to present for my highlight, which is which is the forced sterilization of women in detention centers.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Like, I think that a lot of times when you hear things just in the media, you're just like, like you don't know how to conceptualize it or even like envision it. But this is what the United States government is doing, like performing hysterectomies on women, like forced hysterectomy, which is a crime against humanity, which like is so sickening. Which is
excuse me, y'all. Hold on.
Yeah. Which is so sickening, and like I don't even know what to really do with that information just as an individual. Like I feel so sick to my stomach, but it's like, what do we do? And so that's my highlight. Out of just everything that we've kind of just been like confronted with, is just another level of like things that we'll be talking about 10 years from now when we think about like Nazis and killing the Jews, and when we think about, slavery.
The camps are a crime against humanity. This is just the next step.
So
history once again repeating itself.
Well, no, I would say, and I want to make it a point to say that the concentration camps and detention centers are not different. They're the same thing, because it is the point of incarceration that's actually the first violation, and everything else happening while people are incarcerated is just more violations of their humanity.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Cool. All right, Marisa, do you want us to jump into it?
Okay, so my highlight isn't as serious. It was actually something that, Trump had his disastrous town hall where he just didn't know how to answer any type of questions to his platform. And when they asked him about, everybody's against wearing masks, they don't want to wear the masks. And the moderator asked him, who are they? Who doesn't want to wear these masks? Who is fighting against the masks? And he goes, no. So apparently I'm part of the problem because servers are the whole reason why we shouldn't be wearing masks, because servers don't like the mask. They touch the mask, and then they touch the food, and then they touch the plate, and then they give me my plate, and then the coronavirus. I'm eating coronavirus.
This Trump voice, you can
it's so good.
But it's just that is your answer? Servers who serve you your food don't want to, then you know what? Maybe we should send the servers home and close the country back down.
And pay them.
Start everything and start off. I was oh, heck, out of all the people to pass the buck to, servers? Okay, you know what? All right, go on and do you. But I was just that was one of the worst, I've ever seen. He was so unequipped, and it just brought me so much joy. And then to watch how Fox News reacted to it. Trump was ambushed. No, he did what they normally do. He did a town hall. He agreed to this.
Yeah. Lord, she was he was. I'm how is he?
Right.
Where was he ambushed?
Right.
These are simple questions.
These are normal questions that
normal and simple.
If you do, because I've worked in political consulting, I've worked campaigns. You're supposed to prep your candidate for the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
So either knowing Trump, he probably just walked in there and was oh, I'll be good. I'm Gucci.
Right.
What they gonna say? Yeah, I'm Trump. Everybody loves me. I'm convinced he believes that at the end of the day, everybody loves him.
Right.
So, and if you don't love him, you're part of the radical left.
Right.
Yeah.
You could just be a normal person that doesn't like him.
Right.
They were fact checking him in real time. They're no, your program doesn't cover pre-existing conditions. You're actually suing to make sure that any Obamacare deletes that. How do you don't know anything about what's going on? Just the face?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for sharing. I have nothing left to say. I just want to get into the topic of the day. So Marisa, take it away.
So the title of this is what I really thought was gay cancer versus China virus. China virus is what he says. And the topic of today is comparing the two administrations, how the Reagan administration handled the AIDS epidemic and how the Trump administration is handling the coronavirus. And I noticed that there's a lot of similarities. I understand that it was a different time and, a lot more people have died, but I wanted to get your thoughts and discuss, the response, just to put into, give a little bit of backstory. It took the Reagan administration 5 years just to mention AIDS in conversation. They didn't address it. They just mentioned AIDS. It took them 7 years, 6 or 7 years to have it in a speech or to acknowledge or address it. And I feel that, I know that Reagan is the golden boy of the Republican Party, but I want people to remember that he abandoned an entire group of Americans because he didn't agree. I think last week we were talking about how it's damn near the president's only job. His number one job is to protect and serve the American people. So what does it say if he let, because he was briefed more than 3 times, let over 6,000 Americans die before even saying the word? So If you haven't already, I'm going to invite our viewers to go on Vanity Fair. They have a video, and it's called Reagan Administration Chilling Response to the AIDS Crisis, and we'll have that in the link in the description box so you can see how it was addressed. Another title for it is When the AIDS Epidemic Was Funny. So it's disturbing. I'm just going to put that out there, but I'm going to turn to the panel now and ask what are the similarities that they see between this administration and the golden boy Reagan's administration to their pandemic, or their epidemic, excuse me. So whoever wants to go first.
I think we were talking about this pre-recording.
Mm-hmm.
Republicans, and even I think American in general has sort of codified Reagan as this large, I think, because Reagan, but you could really blame Reagan for a lot of the anti-intellectualism, anti-government sentiment that has leached into the, and when I say anti-government, I don't mean like, oh, the American government is and has been in the past detrimental to life of people of color. I mean anti-government as if the government is giving something a rational sort of order around, wear masks, people aren't even listening to that. So Reagan's big thing was like, government should be small, government is the problem. That was his thing. But sometimes government is the problem, but Reagan's solution to government is the problem was more capitalism. So deregulate, allow capitalism to do its thing. Trump has taken a similar stance in that light, and both of them were at heart entertainers. I think Reagan was a lot more, Reagan cared about the American democracy more than Trump cares about the American democracy. I think Reagan was a lot more conscious of looking at least empathetic to the American people than Trump is. But they're both sort of willfully ignorant in any sort of walk of life that doesn't look exactly like theirs. So that's why Reagan kind of just didn't pay attention to the AIDS crisis bubbling under him, because it wasn't impacting people that looked like him. It wasn't impacting people that, act like him. Right. Trump, in the same way, has been willfully ignorant to coronavirus because it wasn't impacting people like him. It wasn't touching him. And you see at the one of his rallies, a reporter asked him, you're not worried about, this being, it was an indoor rally. It's like, you're not worried about this spreading anything to you. He was like, no, yeah, I'm cool. Like, they're all the way, the people behind me have masks on, and then the people who don't have masks on are all the way, I'm on the stage, they're all the way over there. Yeah. So as long as it doesn't affect them, it didn't matter. Right. I think that is sort of a lack of empathy and understanding and grace on both ends. Yeah. Reagan was a lot better at performing, and I think he cared about the office, and Trump just doesn't. And Reagan was actually held political roles before he became the president of the United States. So right. I think that's a difference, yeah.
I have many thoughts about the similarities between the AIDS epidemic and COVID-19 and the response to it. I just wanted to read something that history.com wrote, which was AIDS was called the unspoken yet deadly epidemic. And I think that in the beginning, of at the beginning when COVID was, when everyone went on lockdown and everyone was forced to work from home or furloughed or fired from their job, it was almost as if it was spoken to everyone but the president, if that makes sense. So like as citizens of this country, like everyone was scrambling to like figure out what to do, and we're still in a sense kind of doing the same thing, but like when we looked at leadership, it was kind of just like, it's not a real, like, you know, it's not as deadly, or like it wasn't something to really take seriously from the White House. And so like I think that that was so dangerous. I think that is as much dangerous, what's the word I'm looking for, like him downplaying COVID versus Ronald Reagan not even saying anything until 4 years later. Both are very, very
detrimental
tactics to use when addressing a public health issue. And I just think that, you know, I don't really know the reasons behind it, but to like address what she said, I wrote down something here. I said, the distance kept between anyone who, like, the underlying theme behind both the AIDS epidemic and COVID-19 was the distance kept between anyone who was not white, not male, or heterosexual. And so that's what you saw during the AIDS epidemic, was that like, okay, well, if you're a heterosexual man, you didn't really have to, or white,
Wait, let's pause right there for a second, because white men were dying. It was the homosexual as a whole.
Yeah.
And yeah. So in that particular case, it probably would have been worse if there weren't white people dying, but in this particular case, this didn't really, at least what I saw in my research, did not have a color. It was, you're homosexual, you're tainted, I can't be around you, you're diseased. And they were calling it the gay cancer, the gay plague. So if anybody who was gay.
But I will also interject and say that often white gay men were closeted, or they were wealthy enough where they could live openly homosexual lives and have access to drugs first.
One of the reasons why during Reagan's administration, one of the reasons why they said it wasn't a big deal is because they said the gay population was so small. Now we know that that's not the case. People don't want, it just maybe people don't want you in their business. What made it change was the death of Rock Hudson, who was Reagan's friend, and nobody knew he was a gay man. And honestly, it wasn't anybody's business. But his death is what finally kicked the Reagan administration into action. And that is so disheartening that everything has to personally affect the person in power to make any sort of change. And we're actually seeing that now. Herman Cain died. No, Trump doesn't give a damn about Herman Cain. He needs somebody in his immediate circle to get sick and to die, unfortunately, because that's the only way that they learn. And then there will be change. But I'm sorry, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I mean, what I was gonna say was just everything that you both said, which was that it was, if you were out publicly as a gay person, then like you didn't count as a gay person. So so back to the point that like the AIDS epidemic, the reason why there was no response to it was because it wasn't affecting people in Reagan's personal circle. It wasn't affected the average American, which I mentioned earlier is white, male, and heterosexual. So like if you weren't that, kind of how you're saying now, if you're not a red state, then we don't give a fuck about you. Excuse my language, go die. So but yeah, you're absolutely right. I have a stat here that says in 1992, AIDS was the number one killer between the men, the number one killer of men between the ages of 25 and 44. So that's so many years after HIV/AIDS has come out, and we know that we knew that it was a pandemic or epidemic, and it's still like killing people. And yet there was like, even I think now we're starting to see and talk about AIDS, but back then, like, no one was talking about HIV, no one was talking about AIDS. And so those are my thoughts for now.
Would you like to go, Rock?
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think that there's definitely something interesting about the, like, I'm not even, it's not interesting, not the word. The word is just like convoluted, vile, about the way this administration, I think, is using the naming of the virus in a particular way that's different. Whereas the gay plague and the gay cancer being the term used towards AIDS, but specifically in regards to the community that was being the most impacted, and almost, and I guess a different way, it was saying the second word is okay because of the first word. And so that was where that's where like that, like the evil in the way that AIDS is referred to comes in. But then there's also deeming this the China virus, whereas it's almost redirecting, whereas it's, don't worry about who this is killing, worry about who this is coming from. Like, that's where we want your focus to be, because we don't care, like, as the US government doesn't care who it's killing, but they're also like, that's not even where we want you to focus right now, because we want you to focus on the thing that we're trying to make a villain, we're trying to make to be of concern, which is China, and it like this, again, like othering of international powers and agencies. Whereas, like, the question being, why is it that all of a sudden we have something like the China virus and we're so concerned about China, when has Russia really changed in terms of its interaction and engagement with its people, with its living out of democracy? Like, has any of that changed? Why are we not concerned about its inability to uphold its democracy? Whereas we're always so concerned about other countries' ability to hold fair and safe elections. But we've literally, like, seen Putin poison opposition leaders with poison only he has access to, and America said nothing about it.
Well, specifically Trump said absolutely, actually said that I don't think Putin did it. Like, nah, that ain't happening.
Yeah.
Even though his own government, like his own allies have said, the British have said, yeah, that's Russian poison. Like the Germans, I think, yeah, that's Russia's poison. So it's, we live in an interesting time.
So yeah, so definitely both, like, evil, like there's an insidious rationale behind the naming of them, but it's in different directions.
If I may, I do want to say that, like, I would say that there is a difference between, like, COVID and AIDS. I want to say, like, AIDS and HIV are not the same thing. Just for, like, I'm always, like, cognizant of that. HIV is definitely not AIDS. They're two different things. But I'm just gonna say that for the purpose of this. But I think that COVID has affected everyone in a way that, like, AIDS did not affect everyone. So, like, and I mean this by saying, like, even if you didn't die or catch COVID or, like, showed symptoms of COVID, I think that COVID, like, infiltrated, like, people's way of lives and so much in a way that they had to, like, acknowledge it, as opposed to, like, AIDS. And maybe it did then, but, like, maybe there's no literature on it, or people coming out saying, like, oh, like, my aunt died from AIDS and blah, 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 whatever the case may be. But I think that the responses are very, very, although not exactly similar, they're both, like, detrimental and very, very dangerous. And I think that because of the way that these both, like, pandemics or epidemics have affected, like, communities of color or LGBT communities, like, it's almost like, once again, I feel like, since it's not something that, like, is affecting white males, then no one cares about it, really. Like, we see that COVID is affecting, or COVID has killed primarily, like, you know, indigenous people, Black people, elderly people, and people are like, oh, okay, well, we're still out at the parks, we're still having brunch. Like, yeah, you know, it sucks.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, both responses are have been very, very downcast. And like, I do feel like if Trump wins the election, COVID is something that will be around for the next 4 years. And I think that's scary. And I think I see that parallel between how like Reagan just did not say anything about AIDS for 4 years, and like people are dying from it, and he was just like, you know, like day-to-day, you know, he was just doing his day-to-day thing. So like, yeah, I'm still thinking about it. I have a lot more thoughts, but they're coming as I speak.
So what I wanted to really bring up during the epidemic and the pandemic is the response, and how they were, and the similarities and contrast to the response from today, and then the response back in the 80s from the Reagan administration. Now the Reagan administration, their reasons for the reasons for ignoring, they didn't even downplay it, they ignored it, was they felt it was divine retribution, right? God is punishing you. You shouldn't be using drugs. God is punishing you for that. You shouldn't be gay. That's disgusting. God is punishing you for that. And that's why it was never mentioned. And you listen to press conferences and briefings, and it's a joke to them. I have never in my life, and that's where I want you guys to go back and look at the Vanity Fair interview. Have you ever seen a political issue handled in such a way where you have all the journalists sitting around and laughing? It's more blatant during the Reagan administration, that they're laughing in your face and, you know, using homophobic slurs in such a political setting, in such a professional setting, was abhorrent to see. Now, the Trump administration, his whole reason is it ruins his chances of getting reelected, right? Because if he doesn't get reelected, there's a higher chance of him going to prison. So, and he can keep his power in that way. Now, the people were mobilizing and going out, and because it initially started to affect the Castro, right, in San Francisco. That's where the deaths were happening, in San Francisco mostly, and then some in LA. He was briefed 3 times over the course of 5 years about the deadliness of it. But because it was only affecting gay men and people that were drug users, or, you know, people that were sharing needles and things like that, nobody cared. Nobody cared at first when people started dying here, right? But they did the bare minimum. They shut down travel from China, but we already know that the virus didn't come from China, it came from Europe. So it's also stereotyped another group of people. This is the China virus. This is China virus, even though it's been proven that it came from Europe, from them not closing down, or New York not really getting a heads up. No one getting a heads up. Now,
and separately, the CDC also clarified that no longer are viruses to be named from any form of origin or possible.
He still does it.
Right.
He still wants to put the blame on something else, when it is the government's job to make sure that we are safe and taken care of. Now, what happened was, now even though the government wasn't working, the CDC still was during the Reagan administration, and they had discovered that this is a sexually transmitted disease, or it's from blood or from hemophiliacs, right? And what they actually ended up saying, now, because the White House never came out, there was so much misinformation like there is today. Except this time, they skew it themselves. The White House likes to make up their own narrative, where back in the day, people were making up the narrative, right? Oh, if you sneeze on me, I'll get AIDS, I'll get HIV. Oh, it comes from kissing, or it comes from being in the same room. And we saw a lot of people who had AIDS. If you had a loved one who had AIDS, you would have to take care of that person, even if they would be in the hospital, because the nurses were afraid to go into the room because nobody knew how it was being transmitted, or they weren't making it widely available how it was being transmitted, right? So we still see people dying alone in rooms or with very little family, just like we see in COVID. Because nobody knew how it was transferred. You know, it would disfigure you, the AIDS virus. It would create patches and lesions all over your skin. It would emaciate you. So visually, it was something that was terrifying to see. Where, I don't know, I pray to God I don't see anybody that is, you know, COVID on the ventilator. But I think that would be pretty terrifying too. We've heard people reenact the scenes that are going on. I think I just really want to make this clear. Reagan was a bad man. He was not a good president at all. He was not. He was not a good president. Yes, he had a great economy, but he failed the American people. He absolutely failed them, just like this president is doing. Now, it's not to the record. My God, once Reagan actually said the word, I believe it was 3,000 people had died. Okay. 3,000 people had died. Now with Trump, we're at least at 200,000 dead, rounding. And remember, you're going to multiply that number by 2 or 3 at least, because we don't have the tests. So even though it was on a smaller scale, it was still one of the most egregious responses, one of the major abuses of power, and a whole forgotten people. So that's what I wanted to really put in there, is people are being forgotten about for the benefit, whether it be political or religious or otherwise. And that's what I wanted to really add in there. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think she covered it. Covered it pretty well. I think there's similarities between two figures, and I think there's similarities between how they feel that they should address a public health crisis.
The disregard of human life.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And I want to just point out one more thing. Have you guys noticed that there's a bunch of people walking around with Ebola around here? Has there been an upspark in Ebola cases? Because since the crisis started, the AIDS crisis, we've had over 650,000 people die in America, you know, over that 30, 40-year span. We had an Ebola outbreak here. And you know what? It was handled. 2 people died. It didn't go out of control. We don't have mass numbers. If this had been taken seriously in the beginning, we wouldn't have the same amount of deaths. We wouldn't have the same amount of suffering. We'd probably have very low numbers of AIDS in this country, AIDS and HIV. But these administrations let this whole thing get out of run rampant from their own personal reasons.
From a public health perspective, it's much easier to see Ebola than it is to see AIDS. I think that because when you get Ebola, you have your you get a hemorrhagic fever, so you start bleeding from your orifices.
But at the same time,
silent killer.
With AIDS, it would disfigure you.
Yeah,
it would leave lesions all over the body. It would emaciate you.
Yeah,
you know, if they had decided to even do some sort of contract tracing, or, you know, just be seriously about it, because they didn't take it seriously for 5 years. They let that go berserk for 5 years, and it lays dormant in people's bodies. Yeah. So if they had acted the moment that they knew they had the information, he had the information walking into the office, and he chose not to do anything about it.
Yeah.
All a choice.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I think that don't be sorry, girl. You're bringing us information, and we're so thankful. I think that wraps up today's episode. One of the things that we mentioned on our break, not that you guys see our breaks, but was that we would actually like to come back with like a public health expert, someone who's probably living during the AIDS epidemic, to kind of like discuss what, you know, the similarities between then and now. And so look out for that. Keep your fingers crossed. But this has been the Rona Report. I am your host. My name is Chijioke Elizabeth.
I'm Chi.
I'm Rock.
And I'm Marisa.
And thank you for watching. Have a good night.